I know this will end up getting buried, laughed at, downvoted to hell, all of the above, but here goes. I used to live in Plattsburgh, New York, on the shores of Lake Champlain. Go ahead and Google it. There's allegedly a resident lake monster named Champ who lives there. It's supposed to be like the Loch Ness Monster, a plesiosaur-type creature. People talk about him and report sightings all the time. I've never once believed for a minute that any such creature existed. One of my majors was philosophy, and I am a very critical, analytical thinker. The other major was biological anthropology, and I have always had enough ammunition to shoot down most claims of UMAS or mythical creatures. I am also a huge outdoorsman and spend quite a bit of time outside, in the woods, on the water, perusing game. One summer a few years ago, I was doing just that. I was out on a friend's boat in northern Lake Champlain, practicing for an FLW fishing tournament. We were in about 15 feet of water when all of a sudden something I cannot explain breaches the water 15 or 20 yards away. The portion of the animal I saw was 4 feet long and very wide. It was a dark gray color with no scales. It was there and gone in the space of 4 seconds. It simply broke the surface and dove back into the water. It looked exactly like a whale breaching, although the impression of size that I got was more dolphin-like. To me, it looked exactly like a harbor seal, of which there are none whatsoever in northern New York. It could have been an otter, but if it was an exceedingly large, fat-ass otter. If it was a beaver, it was not only in the dead wrong habitat for a beaver, but it would also be an absolute world record-size beaver. Lake sturgeon is also out of the question, as the coloration was incorrect. We didn't mark anything on the fish finder. It was headed in the opposite direction, and it did not ask us for 350. But I genuinely do not have a rational explanation for what I witnessed. Compound this with the fact that scientists from the Vermont side of the lake a year earlier who were using digital sound collecting equipment in the lake have confirmed that something in Lake Champlain uses echolocation. This could be faulty equipment, but the phenomena was well documented and repeated at a different time elsewhere in the lake from my understanding. I have no good explanation for what I saw, but I can say without a shadow of a doubt, whatever it was is absolutely what people claim to be Champ. Now that's an interesting study that he mentioned there. There's a piece of cryptid lost media that I was going to make a video on that deals sort of with one of the scientists who carried out the study that discovered echolocation in Lake Champlain. Maybe I'll make that video one day. Mother and I were watching Jaws back in like 2005, late one night, like around 10 p.m. or something. It was the summer holidays, so I didn't have to worry about school or anything. We heard someone knocking on our door, and we lived in an apartment complex and figured it was one of the neighbors or our cousins who lived across the parking lot from us. My mother opened the door, and I went with her since the kitchen was beside the door to grab a snack. We both instantly felt uncomfortable near the door, and I could see she was talking to a kid who couldn't have been any older than 7 years old, and he was asking to come inside because he couldn't find his mother. And he was persistent on coming in. For some reason, my mother and I were like dead set on refusing to let him in. So she offered to hand him her phone. He nodded, and she went to grab her phone from her desk, and when she came back, he was gone. My mother was freaked out, and so was I. She told me the part that made her most uncomfortable was that his eyes were completely black, but she played it off as some trick of the light. Eventually, a few years later, I was reading about urban legends, myths, and the supernatural, and I came across something called black-eyed children and nearly shat myself. Then, come to find out, said apartment complex was built on an Indian burial ground to boot. It was the 1960s. I was in high school and staying overnight at my best friend's house. They were rich and had a horse barn on the property. About 1 a.m, both Joe and I hear the horses carrying on, and we drag our asses out to the barn, calm them down, and go back to bed. No sooner are we back in bed than the horses start going nuts again, only this time they are kicking against the barn walls. We get up to go back out there, a little more awake this time, and off in the distance we notice blinking red lights. His house is in the country, all farmland, and about a mile away were a string of giant power poles. Sitting in midair above one of them was some kind of craft with lights that seemed to blink in a distinct pattern. We both stood there mesmerized by the sight. My arm hair was erect. No more than a minute later, the lights, all we could see from that distance, slowly rose above the pylon, and then poof, it zoomed faster than any craft we had ever seen. And the moment it zoomed off, the horses got quiet. I told my brother-in-law, a county deputy sheriff. He scoffed at me, asked me if we had been smoking that wacky tobacco. 7 years later, he and 6 other patrol cars all called in a mysterious UFO and each described it exactly the same. I got the last laugh. Well, I'll answer seriously because why not? First instance was about 3rd grade. I was laying in bed at night and I saw something in the corner of my room, maybe 10 feet away. I figured it was the shadow of the tree playing tricks on me with the streetlight outside. At that moment, I turned on my bedside lamp and saw that it didn't disappear. No, it was a cloaked figure, about 4 feet tall in the corner of my room, facing away from me, bobbing its head left and right, with its elbows kind of up and to the side, moving opposite of its head. I was dumbfounded and got up from my bed and walked closer to it to see that it was real cloth and a tangible character. At that point, I realized what was happening and started screaming like bloody murder. My dad, who was on call for IT that night, heard my shouts/screams and rushed to my room. As soon as my door opened, it vanished. After that, I slept with the light on for the next 5 years or so. My parents went to the point of placing lighting timers without me knowing, but as soon as I would wake up in the middle of the night and realize the lights were off, I'd remove the timers. The story gives my brother, who was 4 years older, the heebie-jeebies to this day. His room was next to mine. The next story happened when I was 22 and riding my motorcycle home from Chicago to visit friends and still living with my parents in rural Illinois. We lived at the time near Cuba and Rainbow Road, known to be one of the most haunted areas of Illinois. As I was riding home north on Ella, mind you, I was under the influence of no substance whatsoever, I saw a bright light in the sky. It was bizarre. It wasn't the moon or a telecommunications tower, but just a bright light. Nothing like a star. I'm an amateur astronomer. As I turned onto Cuba, the light seemed to accelerate in my side view mirrors and then split into 6 or 7 different balls of light and form a triangle, rapidly approaching me, so I rode even faster. When I turned onto Rainbow Road, the lights flew off away from me, and I was quite startled when I got home and called a friend. The following week, I told a few others, and they sent me local news reports of others seeing the same thing. For the record, I don't believe in ghosts, and I'm typically quite skeptical of almost anything. I have a bachelor's of science in psych, and typically will draw the line at what's easily explainable, but that shit freaked me out. Couldn't sleep, and my friends didn't like what they heard for whatever reason. I had a bizarre feeling like something tried to come back to me, and I don't believe that something exists, but I have no other way to explain it except for what I saw that night. Friend and I saw a UFO shaped like an uppercase Y flying flat with prongs forward at probably 25 miles per hour, about 200 yards above the ground, as it flew between a cloud break on a very overcast day. It was about as long as a big rig trailer. It was not smooth. It had all kinds of different shapes and pipe-type things sticking out of its sides. I never really talk about it because it's anticlimactic. I was with a friend who saw it too. It appeared directly above us in a cloud break that was 100 yards wide at most, but it took forever to cross that break. We both were in the driveway and looked up for absolutely no reason. I saw Bigfoot once, but I've told that story before, so instead I'll tell you about the barn monkey. Lived in the country. We had 2 alpacas and maybe 10 chickens at the time. Every night at dusk, I'd go lock the girls up. My chickens had a secure coop to keep out the wildlife and would retreat to it at dusk. You couldn't lock them up early because at that point you're trying to herd chickens, and good luck with that. The trick was to wait for it to be dark enough that they were all inside, but not so long that they had company in the barn. So, one night I hear my alpacas doing their "there's a scary thing" sound, so I went to lock up the chickens and check it out. The alpacas were at the far end of their pasture just absolutely losing their shit. But the chickens were in the barn, silent. Usually there's squabbles over the best perches and a few last-minute rooster assaults, but tonight they were petrified. So I walked into the barn on high alert. It's a very small barn. 3 unused goat stalls, the secure coop, a hayloft above the stalls, and an open space that was maybe 10 by 10 feet. To access the coop door, you had to walk through the open area of the barn, in the dark. I did this literally every night and I was never afraid. There wasn't electricity run out to the barn, but I didn't use any light or even the flashlight on my phone. But it was still dusk, so you could kinda see inside. I took 2 or 3 steps in and sensed movement up in the rafters. We had lost a few chickens to possums and raccoons as well as fox, so when I looked up I expected to see a raccoon or possum. Nope. Perched on a rafter, maybe 7 feet over the top of my head and several feet to the right, was a monkey, staring at me. I clapped my hands and stomped my feet on the plank floor to scare it off, and was successful. The creature, whatever it was, leapt from beam to beam until it disappeared into the hayloft. I know my local critters at least passingly well. That was no possum, way too big, limbs were much longer than a possum. This was no raccoon. Whatever I saw was slightly larger and had very soft fur with a rather flexible tail. Even a raccoon with severe mange wouldn't fit the bill. I logically know it wasn't a monkey, and I never saw it again, but I still can't tell you what it was. I used a flashlight in the barn for a few weeks after that. Once the power went out in our whole neighborhood, and about 10 minutes later, the entire neighborhood flashed with colors so bright they came in the windows. It was terrifying, but everyone was exceptionally calm about it. The memory is very choppy and missing time. Nobody ever discussed it because we were terrified about it in the following days. It was not from this world and was not a transformer exploding. One night I saw what is best described as a Christmas tree in the sky. I've Googled Christmas tree UFO, that's not what I saw. Lived in the country, nothing but woods for about 10 miles behind my house. Sitting on my back steps, smoking a cigarette. Yard lights up and I see something. Rises to just at the tree line. Dead quiet, it can't be a helicopter, but who the hell would land a helicopter in the middle of the woods anyway? I walked around the side of my house just watching it. It moved so slow and it seemed so close, but with absolutely no sound. It made a turn when it was roughly over the only highway in the area and it was gone. As I mentioned, I lived in the country, so I've done a lot of stargazing. I've seen plenty of planes, helicopters, satellites, meteorites. Hell, I've seen a bolide explode. I don't know what that is, but that's the most surreal and unexplainable thing I've ever seen. Edit. Upon further Googling, I really can't find a good approximation of what I saw, but it was like 12 lights of different colors in a triangle. The body was just backlit enough to see it was solid. That's the best I can describe it for you.